We'd prefer if you left. Amanda's voice cut through the elegant Christmas party like ice, her designer dress sparkling under the chandelier as she looked me up and down with disgust. My hands were still dirty from helping a stranger with her broken-down car, my simple dress wrinkled from the December cold. I had arrived 30 minutes late to my son's in-laws' mansion, expecting understanding, but finding only contempt instead. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how a 64-year-old woman named Margaret Sullivan ended up being humiliated at the fanciest Christmas party in Greenwich, Connecticut. It's a story about family, pride, and discovering that sometimes the people you help on the roadside can change your entire life. 3 months earlier, I'd been living quietly in my small apartment, stretching my modest pension to make ends meet. My husband Frank had died 5 years ago, leaving me with just enough to survive, but not enough to thrive. Then my son David called with news that should have made me happy. "Mom, Amanda's family wants to meet you. Really meet you this time." His voice carried that careful tone he used when walking on eggshells. "They're having their annual Christmas party, and they specifically asked me to invite you." I should have been thrilled. After 3 years of marriage, David's wife Amanda had barely acknowledged my existence. The Whitmans were Connecticut royalty, old money, old traditions, and definitely old attitudes about people like me. Amanda's grandmother had built some kind of business empire, and every family gathering felt like a board meeting where I definitely wasn't qualified to attend. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, though something in David's voice made me cautious. What changed their minds? "Amanda's been talking to her grandmother about family, about how important it is to include everyone." He paused. "Just maybe dress nicely. You know how they are about appearances." I knew exactly how they were about appearances. Every time I'd seen Amanda, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Perfect hair, perfect clothes, perfect everything. Meanwhile, I shopped at discount stores and cut my own hair to save money. But this was my chance. My chance to finally be part of David's new life, to show them I wasn't the embarrassment they thought I was. So I said yes, not knowing that decision would lead me to a roadside encounter that would expose exactly what my son's in-laws thought of women like me. The relationship between me and the Whitman family had been complicated from the start. David met Amanda during his residency at Yale Hospital, and I could tell immediately she came from a different world. When she first visited our apartment, she'd looked around with barely concealed horror at my second-hand furniture and outdated appliances. "It's very cozy," she'd said. Her tone suggesting cozy was the worst possible thing a home could be. I'd tried to win her over with my cooking, my stories, my genuine interest in her life, but Amanda had already categorized me as David's poor mother, and nothing I did would change that label. The wedding was my first real taste of Whitman family dynamics. Held at their estate in Greenwich, it was an event that cost more than I'd earned in 5 years. I wore my best dress, a navy blue number I'd bought for Frank's funeral, and felt like a sparrow among peacocks. Amanda's mother, Patricia Whitman, had introduced me to guests as David's mother from New Haven. Not by name, just by relationship and geography. As if I were a distant relative, they were obligated to acknowledge. But it was Amanda's grandmother who intrigued me most. Eleanor Whitman was elegant in that way only very wealthy older women can be. Unlike what Amanda often implied about her being out of touch, Eleanor clearly paid attention to everything with sharp blue eyes, taking mental notes on conversations and interactions. "Your grandmother seems very sharp," I'd said to Amanda during the reception. "Grandmother keeps her opinions to herself mostly," Amanda replied carefully. "She lets Dad handle the business decisions now." I'd found that interesting phrasing, lets rather than can't or doesn't. But family dynamics in wealthy families were probably different from what I knew. After the wedding, David and Amanda moved to Connecticut to be closer to her family. Our visits became less frequent, our phone calls shorter. When I did see them, conversation felt forced, like David was translating between 2 different languages, mine and theirs. The few times I'd been to family dinners, I'd been seated at the far end of the table, treated politely but kept at arm's length. The conversations revolved around business deals, country club events, and European vacations. Topics I could listen to but never contribute to meaningfully. David had tried to bridge the gap a few times. "Mom, Maybe if you took an interest in Amanda's charity work. Or you could ask Patricia about her garden club. But I could tell he was fighting a losing battle against his wife's subtle but persistent campaign to keep me at a distance. So when David called about the Christmas party invitation, I was genuinely surprised. Maybe Amanda was finally ready to accept me as part of the family. Maybe her grandmother had encouraged more inclusion. Looking back, I should have recognized the invitation for what it really was. The week before the Christmas party, I threw myself into preparation like it was the most important event of my life. In many ways, it was. This felt like my final exam for acceptance into David's new world. I spent 2 days shopping for a dress, trying to find something that looked expensive but fit my budget. The saleswoman at Nordstrom Rack was patient as I explained what I needed. I want to fit in at a very formal Christmas party, I told her. The kind where everyone has money and judges you based on what you're wearing. She found me a burgundy dress with subtle beading that had been marked down from $200 to $65. It wasn't designer, but it looked respectable. I bought matching shoes that pinched my feet and a small purse that coordinated perfectly. David called twice that week with helpful suggestions about the party. Mom, remember that Amanda's family is pretty traditional, conservative conversation topics, you know? His voice carried that familiar tension. Maybe avoid talking about politics or, well, anything controversial. Honey, I've been having dinner conversations since before you were born. I think I can manage not to offend anyone. I know, it's just... He paused. Amanda's been stressed about this party. Her whole extended family will be there, plus her father's business associates. She wants everything to go smoothly. Everything. Including me, apparently. The unspoken message was clear. Don't embarrass us. The night before the party, I practiced conversations in my mirror. How to respond when asked about my work history. How to gracefully deflect questions about my small apartment. How to sound interested in topics I knew nothing about. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, to ask if she could take care of my cat. Big family party? She asked. The biggest. My son's in-laws are very wealthy, very proper. This is my chance to finally become part of their family. Mrs. Chen, who'd immigrated from Taiwan 40 years ago and understood something about trying to fit into new worlds, squeezed my hand. Just be yourself, Margaret. If they don't see your worth, that's their loss. But being myself hadn't worked for 3 years. Maybe it was time to try being who they wanted me to be. I went to bed early, my alarm set for 8 a.m., so I'd have plenty time to get ready. The party started at 2 p.m., and I'd planned every detail. Hair appointment at 10, final dress fitting at noon, arrive fashionably on time at 2:15. I fell asleep thinking about how surprised Amanda would be when I walked in looking elegant and appropriate. How her parents might finally see me as worthy of their son. How Eleanor might actually have a real conversation with me. I should have paid more attention to the weather forecast. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of December storm that makes Connecticut winters legendary. I woke to ice pelting my windows and a weather alert on my phone, warning of dangerous driving conditions. The hair appointment was canceled when the salon lost power. The dress pickup was delayed when the alteration shop's street flooded. By noon, I was sitting in my bathrobe, watching freezing rain coat everything in a treacherous glaze, wondering if the party would even happen. David called at 12:30. Mom, are you still planning to come? The roads are pretty bad. I could hear Amanda in the background. Tell her the party's still on. Everyone's already here. Everyone except me, apparently. The realization that I was the only one battling the weather to attend hit harder than it should have. I'll be there, I told David. I wouldn't miss it. Without professional help, I did my own hair and makeup, trying to achieve the polished look I'd seen on Amanda. My hands shook slightly as I applied lipstick. Nerves, I told myself, not age. The burgundy dress fit perfectly, and for a moment I felt genuinely elegant. The woman in my mirror looked like she belonged at sophisticated parties, at least until I caught sight of my practical winter coat, the only one I owned. I left my apartment at 1:30, giving myself extra time for careful driving. The roads were slick but manageable if you drove slowly and stayed focused. Other drivers clearly had the same idea. Traffic moved at a cautious crawl. Everything was going fine until I reached the winding road leading to the Whitman estate. That's when I saw her, an elderly woman standing beside a luxury sedan with its hood up, wearing an expensive-looking coat but no hat, ice forming on her silver hair. I could have driven past. The smart thing would have been to call AAA from my phone and continue to the party. I was already running late, and stopping would make me even later. But I couldn't leave an elderly woman stranded in dangerous weather, even if it meant arriving at the most important social event of my life, looking less than perfect. I pulled over and rolled down my window. "Do you need help?" The woman turned, and I got my first clear look at her face. She was probably late 70s, with the kind of bone structure that suggested she'd been beautiful her entire life. Her blue eyes were sharp and assessing, not confused or helpless like I'd expected. "My car won't start," she said calmly. "The engine just died." I should have just called for help and left. But something about her composed dignity in the face of crisis reminded me of my own mother. "Let me take a look," I heard myself saying. Getting out of my car meant abandoning any hope of arriving at the party looking pristine. The freezing rain soaked through my coat immediately, and I could feel my carefully styled hair beginning to wilt. The woman watched as I examined her engine. I wasn't a mechanic, but Frank had taught me basic car maintenance before he died. "Battery terminals are corroded," I called out, raising my voice over the wind. "Do you have any cola in the car?" She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Cola? Coca-Cola works great for cleaning battery corrosion. Emergency trick my husband taught me." She opened her car and produced a small bottle of Coke from what looked like a very expensive handbag. As I poured the cola over the battery terminals, I was acutely aware of how ridiculous this must look. Two women in formal wear performing roadside repairs in an ice storm. "You're going to ruin your dress," she observed. "Already am," I said, scraping corrosion with my car key. "Sometimes you just have to prioritize helping people over staying clean." While we waited for the cola to work, she asked where I was headed. "Christmas party," I said, not mentioning it was my first real invitation into the Whitman family circle. "My son's in-laws. Very formal affair. And you stopped to help a stranger?" I shrugged. "Couldn't leave you stranded. Family events happen every year, but leaving someone in danger? That would bother me forever." Something shifted in her expression when I said that. Her assessing gaze softened into something that looked almost like approval. "Try starting it now," I suggested. The engine turned over smoothly. She smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from her. "You're very kind," she said. "Not many people would have stopped, especially dressed for a formal party." I looked down at my outfit. My coat was soaked, my dress had grease stains on the skirt, and my hair was plastered to my head. The elegant woman I'd been an hour ago was gone. "Well, I can't exactly show up to this party looking like this," I said, trying to laugh off my disappointment. "Maybe I should just head home." "Nonsense," she said firmly. "Anyone worth knowing will understand that you put kindness before vanity. And if they don't understand that, they're not worth knowing." She reached into her purse and handed me an embossed business card. "Eleanor Whitman," it read. My heart stopped. "You're Amanda's grandmother," I whispered. Her blue eyes, so much like Amanda's but infinitely warmer, held something that might have been satisfaction. "I am indeed. And you must be Margaret Sullivan, David's mother." She paused, studying my shocked face. "I've been very curious to meet the woman who raised such a good man." My mind raced. This was Eleanor Whitman? The woman Amanda described as letting others handle business decisions? The one who supposedly stayed out of family matters? "I had no idea," I stammered. "I'm quite sure you didn't," she said, her tone carrying layers of meaning I couldn't quite grasp. "Shall we head to the party together? I think you'll find it more interesting than you expected." Following Eleanor Whitman's car up the winding drive to the family estate, I tried to process what had just happened. I'd stopped to help a stranger and discovered she was the matriarch of the family I'd been trying to impress for 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. After all my preparation, all my worry about making the right impression, I was arriving exactly as I was, disheveled, dirty, and completely authentic. The Whitman estate rose before us like something from a movie set. Christmas lights outlined every window and doorway, and I could see elegant figures moving through the grand rooms. Valets waited under a covered portico to take our cars. "Mrs. Whitman!" The young man who opened Eleanor's door seemed surprised. "We weren't expecting you for another hour. Your driver called to say the roads were too dangerous." "I decided to drive myself," she said simply. then waited as another valet approached my modest sedan with barely concealed confusion. So that explained it. Her driver had canceled due to the weather. But Eleanor had decided to come anyway. That was why she'd been stranded. I caught my reflection in the lobby mirror and winced. My makeup had mostly worn off. My hair hung in damp strings, and the grease stains on my dress were even more obvious under the crystal chandelier. "Eleanor!" Patricia Whitman descended the grand staircase with practiced grace, then stopped short when she saw me. And Margaret, how unexpected. The way she said unexpected made it clear she meant unfortunate. Margaret helped me with car trouble, Eleanor explained calmly. Quite resourcefully, actually. Amanda appeared from the main parlor, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her smile froze when she saw my appearance. "Oh my goodness, Margaret, what happened to you?" Before I could answer, David rushed over. I could see the embarrassment and concern warring on his face as he took in my disheveled state. "Mom, are you okay? You look like you've been in an accident." "I'm fine. Honey, I just stopped to help someone with car trouble." "You could have called AADA," Amanda said, her voice carrying a note of exasperation. "Now you'll need to freshen up before meeting everyone." The main parlor fell quiet as we entered. Conversations paused mid-sentence as Connecticut's social elite took in the sight of the bedraggled woman who'd somehow made it past their velvet rope. I felt every stare, every raised eyebrow, every whispered comment. This was exactly what I'd feared, being judged, found wanting, and dismissed. Amanda leaned close to David, her voice a stage whisper meant to be overheard. "David, this is embarrassing. Everyone's staring. Maybe she should go home and change. Come back later." But before David could respond, Amanda's father stepped forward. Richard Whitman had the commanding presence that came with inherited wealth and social position. "Margaret," he said, his tone politely cool, "how good of you to join us. Though perhaps you'd be more comfortable if you left to get cleaned up. We'd completely understand." The message was clear. I wasn't welcome looking like this. Maybe I wasn't welcome at all. I felt my cheeks burn with shame and was about to excuse myself when Eleanor's voice cut through the awkward silence like a blade. "Actually, Richard, I think everyone should hear about Margaret's good deed before she changes clothes." Eleanor's tone was mild, but something in it made the entire room pay attention. After all, kindness is so rare these days. And that's when I realized Eleanor Whitman was about to turn this humiliation into something else entirely. Something that would change everything. "Margaret didn't just help me with car trouble," Eleanor announced to the silent room, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "She sacrificed her own appearance at this party to make sure I wasn't stranded in dangerous weather. That's the kind of character we should be celebrating." I stood there dripping on their Persian rug, feeling like a specimen under a microscope. But Eleanor wasn't finished. "How many of you would have stopped?" she continued, her sharp blue eyes scanning the faces of Connecticut's finest. "How many would have chosen helping a stranger over making a good impression?" The silence was deafening. I caught sight of Amanda's face. She looked like she'd swallowed something sour. "Mother," Richard began, but Eleanor held up one elegant hand. "I'm not finished, Richard." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Margaret, would you mind telling everyone exactly what you did to help me?" I felt every eye in the room on me. Part of me wanted to disappear, but a larger part was curious to see where Eleanor was going with this. "I used Coca-Cola to clean the corrosion off her battery terminals," I said simply. "It's an old trick my late husband taught me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone actually giggled. "Coca-Cola," Eleanor repeated thoughtfully. "Practical knowledge, applied without hesitation to help someone in need. No concern for expensive clothes or perfect hair, just immediate action to solve a problem." She moved to stand beside me, and I noticed that despite her 78 years, she commanded the room effortlessly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that built this family's fortune," she said quietly. "The willingness to get your hands dirty when something needs fixing." Amanda stepped forward, her smile tight. "Grandmother, perhaps we should let Margaret get cleaned up before..." "Before what, Amanda? Before she makes us look bad." Eleanor's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "I think Margaret looks exactly like someone who puts helping others before her own comfort. That's quite beautiful, actually." I felt a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the grand fireplace. For the first time in 3 years, someone in this family was defending me. Now then, Eleanor continued briskly, I believe Margaret deserves to enjoy this party just as she is. After all, authenticity is so much more valuable than artifice. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Of course, Mother. Margaret, please, make yourself comfortable. But I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Eleanor had just publicly championed me, and he was smart enough to know that opposing her openly would be a mistake. The crowd began to disperse back into smaller conversations, but I noticed the glances now carried curiosity rather than dismissal. Eleanor Whitman had just elevated my status with a few carefully chosen words. Thank you, I whispered to her. She smiled, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of something that looked almost like strategic satisfaction. My dear, we're just getting started. The next hour passed in a surreal haze. Word of Eleanor's endorsement spread through the party like wildfire, and suddenly, people who'd been avoiding eye contact were introducing themselves and asking about my adventure, helping Mrs. Whitman. I found myself telling the story multiple times, each retelling making me feel less embarrassed about my appearance. These people hung on every detail: the freezing rain, the corroded battery, the Coca-Cola solution. How resourceful, exclaimed a woman wearing pearls that probably cost more than my car. I wouldn't have known the first thing about car trouble. David appeared at my elbow, still looking concerned but also puzzled. Mom, are you sure you're okay? You don't need to stay if you're uncomfortable. Actually, I'm having a lovely time, I said, surprised to realize it was true. Your grandmother-in-law is quite remarkable. She's always been sharp, he said quietly. I've tried to tell Amanda that Grandmother Eleanor isn't as uninvolved as she pretends to be. She notices everything. So David had seen it too. That made me feel slightly better about the family dynamics I'd been navigating. Amanda joined us, her expression carefully neutral. Grandmother can be very protective of people she takes a liking to. Her tone suggested this wasn't necessarily a good thing. Margaret, Eleanor's voice carried across the room. Come, there's someone I'd like you to meet. She led me to a distinguished man in his 60s. This is James Morrison, our family attorney and longtime friend. James, this is Margaret Sullivan, the woman I was telling you about. James shook my hand warmly. Eleanor's been singing your praises, says you have excellent instincts for solving problems. I just helped with a car, I said, bewildered by all the attention. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most elegant, Eleanor said meaningfully. James and I were just discussing some business matters that require a fresh perspective on community engagement. They exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes. I was missing something important, but before I could ask what, dinner was announced. The dining room could have housed my entire apartment. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over a table set with enough china and silver to stock a small store. I found myself seated between Eleanor and a charming elderly gentleman who turned out to be a retired ambassador. Margaret helped me today, Eleanor announced to our section of the table as the first course was served. Demonstrated exactly the kind of practical wisdom and selflessness that built the foundations of success. How wonderful, said the ambassador's wife. It's so refreshing to meet someone who actually does something helpful instead of just talking about it. Throughout dinner, Eleanor kept drawing me into conversations about everything from community volunteer work to my late husband's carpentry business. She seemed genuinely interested in my life, asking thoughtful questions that made me feel like my experiences mattered. Frank sounds like he was a remarkable man, she said when I mentioned how he'd taught neighborhood kids woodworking skills for free. Building things, teaching skills, helping others succeed. That's real legacy. But I also noticed that Amanda kept glancing at her father with increasing anxiety, and Richard's jaw grew tighter each time Eleanor praised me. Something was building toward a confrontation, and I had the uncomfortable feeling I was about to be caught in the middle of it. After dinner, Eleanor suggested we move to the library for coffee and brandy. The room was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather chairs arranged around a massive fireplace, oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors watching from gilded frames. This is where the real conversations happen, Eleanor confided, as she settled into a wingback chair that might have been a throne, away from the formal dining room performance. The smaller group that joined us included Richard, Patricia, Amanda, David, and a few family friends. I noticed James Morrison positioned himself where he could observe everything. "Mother," Richard began carefully, "it's been a lovely evening, but perhaps we should discuss the quarterly reports tomorrow." "Actually, I've been reviewing those," Eleanor interrupted smoothly. "Quite concerning reading, actually." Amanda and Richard exchanged a quick glance that made my internal radar ping. Something was definitely happening here that went beyond polite dinner conversation. "The company's doing well," Richard continued defensively. "Strong profits, steady growth. The restructuring I implemented has been very successful. Financially successful, yes, but we seem to have lost sight of our founding values," Eleanor replied calmly. "When was the last time Whitman Industries contributed meaningfully to the community that built our success?" "Mother, community relations is expensive overhead." "It's not overhead, Richard. It's responsibility." Eleanor stood and walked to a portrait near the fireplace. It showed a woman in her 40s wearing a simple but elegant dress from the late 1960s. She had Eleanor's bone structure and the same intelligent blue eyes. "This is me in 1969, Eleanor said calmly. "The year I started Whitman Industries with a $5,000 loan and a rented storefront in Hartford." The room went very quiet. I stared at the portrait, then at Eleanor, my mind racing. "I was 23 years old, a young mother with big dreams and bigger determination," she continued. "Everyone told me that women couldn't build successful businesses. Instead of listening, I decided to prove them wrong." Amanda looked pale. "Grandmother, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I built this company from nothing. Every contract, every expansion, every success came from my vision, my decisions. My willingness to work 18-hour days and solve problems other people couldn't solve." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Mother, we all know you were instrumental in the early days." "Not instrumental, Richard. Foundational. I didn't help build Whitman Industries. I am Whitman Industries." Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Your grandfather Harold was a wonderful husband and father, but he was a high school teacher. The business success came entirely from my work." She turned to look directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my breath catch. "Margaret reminded me today of who I used to be, who I still am, underneath decades of letting others take credit for my work. Someone who solves problems and helps people, no matter how it looks to others." The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about dinner party conversation. This was about power, legacy, and a family that had forgotten its roots. Eleanor Whitman wasn't just Amanda's grandmother. She was the founder, the source of everything, and she was about to remind everyone exactly what that meant. "You built the entire company yourself," I whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. "Not your husband or father-in-law, you." Eleanor smiled, the first completely genuine expression I'd seen from her all evening. Smart woman. "Yes, I built Whitman Industries from scratch. Harold was a wonderful man and supportive husband, but the business was entirely mine." The silence in the room was deafening. Amanda looked like she might faint. "But everyone always talks about Grandfather Whitman's business legacy," David said, his voice confused. "The founding vision, the family tradition. I let people assume Harold had built the company because it was easier in those days," Eleanor said matter-of-factly. "A woman-owned business faced extra scrutiny, discrimination from suppliers, resistance from clients. It was simpler to let Harold be the public face while I did the actual work." Richard's face had gone from pale to flushed. "Mother, you can't just—" "Can't what? Tell the truth about my own company?" Eleanor's voice carried decades of accumulated authority. "Remind my family that their privilege came from a woman who understood the value of hard work and treating people with dignity?" She moved to stand behind my chair, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Today, Margaret demonstrated the exact qualities that built this family's fortune: practical problem-solving, willingness to sacrifice for others, character over appearance, qualities that seem to have gotten lost along the way." Amanda found her voice. "Grandmother, this is hardly fair. We can't all be automotive repair experts." "It's not about automotive repair, Amanda." Eleanor's tone was patient but firm. "It's about values. When faced with a choice between helping someone in need and protecting your own comfort, what do you choose?" The weight of her words settled over the room like a blanket. I thought about every interaction I'd had with this family over the past 3 years. Every dismissive comment, every subtle snub, every time I'd been made to feel like I wasn't good enough for their world. Margaret has been part of this family for 3 years, Eleanor continued. 3 years of being treated like an inconvenience. Like her values don't matter, like David made some kind of mistake. That's not, Amanda started. Isn't it? Eleanor's eyebrows rose. When was the last time you invited Margaret to anything beyond obligatory holidays? When did you last ask about her life, her interests, her well-being? David looked stricken. I tried to encourage more inclusion, but you let it slide, because confronting it was uncomfortable, Eleanor said gently. That's human nature, David, but it's not acceptable. She walked to the massive desk in the corner and picked up a thick folder. James has been helping me prepare for this conversation for several months, she said. I've been planning to resume a more active role in company operations. Richard shot to his feet. Mother, the company is running perfectly fine. Financially, yes. Ethically, no. Eleanor's smile was sharp. We've become exactly what I never wanted. A business that prioritizes profit over people. The room erupted in shocked voices, but Eleanor held up her hand for silence. Margaret, she said, turning to me with eyes that sparkled with purpose, I have a proposition for you. I'd like to offer you a consulting position with Whitman Industries, Eleanor said calmly, as if she hadn't just dropped a bomb in the middle of her family's Christmas party. Head of Community Engagement and Values Implementation. We'll start with a 6-month trial at $75,000 with the potential for a permanent executive role if things work out. I'm pretty sure my jaw actually dropped. Around the room, I could see similar expressions of shock, though $75,000 was more reasonable than the astronomical figure I'd been expecting. Eleanor, I managed. I don't understand. It's quite simple. Whitman Industries has lost touch with the community values that made us successful. You understand people, Margaret. You help without being asked. Solve problems without complaining, and treat everyone with dignity regardless of their social status. She opened the folder and pulled out several documents. I've been planning this restructuring for months, but I needed to find the right person to help implement it. Today confirmed what I'd hoped, that you have the character and instincts we need. This is insane, Richard burst out. Mother, you can't just create positions based on car repair skills. Eleanor's gaze could have frozen water. Richard, under your leadership, our employee satisfaction has plummeted, our community involvement has disappeared, and our charitable giving has dropped to the legal minimum. Margaret represents exactly what we need to reconnect with our values. She turned back to me. The position would involve developing community partnerships, overseeing our corporate responsibility initiatives, and helping create a more human-centered workplace culture. You'd work directly with me, at least initially. My head was spinning. 6 hours ago, I'd been worried about fitting in at a family party. Now I was being offered a chance to reshape how a major company operated. But I have no experience in corporate consulting, I protested. You have experience in what matters most. Caring about people and solving real problems, Eleanor said firmly. The business skills can be learned, the character cannot. Amanda found her voice, though it was strained. Grandmother, this is very sudden. Perhaps Margaret needs time to consider. Actually, I interrupted, surprising myself with my boldness. I'd like to accept. The trial position, at least. The words came out before I'd fully processed them, but they felt right. This wasn't just about the job or validation. This was about being valued for who I truly was and having a chance to make a difference. Eleanor's smile lit up the entire room. Excellent. James, please prepare a consulting agreement. Wait, David said, looking concerned. Mom, are you sure about this? It's such a big change. I looked at my son, seeing the worry in his eyes, but also something else. Respect, maybe even pride. Honey, I've spent 3 years trying to fit into a world that didn't want me. Now I have a chance to help that world become a better place. How could I say no? Richard cleared his throat. And my role in all this? You remain CEO, Eleanor said calmly, but with restored board oversight and a renewed focus on the values that built this company. Consider this a course correction, not a takeover. She looked around the room at the shocked faces, then back at me. Margaret, you've reminded me that true wealth isn't just measured in financial statements. It's measured in how many lives you improve, how many people you help, and how much good you do with the resources you've been given. As I stood in that magnificent library, still wearing my stained dress and ruined shoes, I realized something profound had just happened. I hadn't just found acceptance in this family. I'd found a purpose I never knew I was looking for. Eleanor Whitman, who had built an empire from nothing 55 years ago, had seen something in me that I'd almost forgotten existed. Not just the woman who'd helped with car trouble, but someone capable of helping others on a much larger scale. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The woman who'd arrived as an outsider was leaving as a partner in rebuilding something important. And tomorrow, I'd start the most meaningful work of my life. Some Christmas parties change your outfit. This one changed my entire future. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.